Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth, also known as the Continuum Chronicles. As always, I'm your host, Chris Kent, the Game Master. And today we're going to be talking about the classic Universal monsters, specifically the Mummy. Um, this particular game session I ran as a Halloween party in 2009. My wife and I had just moved to a new house in the Christmas of 2008. So this was our first Halloween in that house. We invited people over, and I love the Universal monsters. I feel like they're a huge part of pop culture. You know what I mean? As a kid, I'm not quite the age. I'm a little too young for this, but I do kind of remember like when I was a little kid, the teenagers would be reading magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland and stuff like that. And they had like model kits in the 1970s of, the creature from the Black Lagoon and Wolfman and, all that jazz. And so like I'd grown up with that and I'd seen a lot of the Universal stuff, especially around Halloween. Um, we had horror hosts locally, kind of like you might think of Elvira, right? And they would always run like on a Friday night or Saturday night or something in the 80s. You would see these old black and white movies with Dracula and stuff like that. And at any rate, um, so over the years, I'd done a good bit of that in the game. We've probably done more werewolf stuff than anything else. And then number two is probably vampires, right? But I realized in 2009 that as of then, I had never ran a role playing game with a mummy in it. And furthermore, even though I'd played a massive amount of Dungeons and Dragons, because I used to own a comic book store, and literally we had like at least one game a day every day in that comic book store. And 99% of the time it was Dungeons and Dragons, right? In all of those games where I was just sitting behind the register listening to other people play, not once did I ever hear any of them use a mummy. Not once did I ever sit in a game where there was a mummy, right? And so I realized that. And I said something to the other guys I played with, and I was like, "Have you guys ever been in a D&D game where there was a mummy?" Because we would see him in the book all the time. And they were like, "No, we've never played in a mummy game." And I was like, "We should do that. We should do the classic universal version of the mummy, right?" So that's what we did. And we ran the whole thing using the D20 system. So all of the player characters were human beings with jobs appropriate to the 1930s, right? So it's like archaeologists and museum curators and stuff like that. And at any rate, more or less, basically everybody was Indiana Jones. That's kind of the bottom line there. But at any rate, so the bad guy, of course, is the mummy. And then the prologue to that game is I mean, it's really quick and simple for me to explain the plot. The prologue is the archaeologists find this mummy in Egypt and they bring it to America, put it in a museum. That's it. The main body of this one is that the mummy is interesting because it can actually use illusions and stuff to try to pass itself off as human. So sometimes it's actually talking to people and they have no idea they're talking to a mummy. They think they're talking to, it's been so long since I ran it. I can't remember what occupation he claimed he had, like a scientist of some kind, I think. But they thought they were like talking to an Egyptian scientist or some kind of a scholar, whose field of expertise was ancient Egypt. And of course, he knows everything about ancient Egypt because he was there. And his whole deal is he had fallen in love with a woman and all this stuff. And then there's a member of the party, one of them, and I can't even remember who was playing her now, but one of our female players was then playing this human woman in the 1930s that the mummy was convinced she was the reincarnation of the love of his life, and so his goal is to turn her into a mummy, and everybody's trying to stop him. And to make a long story short, everybody fails. The mummy wins, and at the end of the thing, he succeeds in turning her into another mummy. And so we had kind of like a bride of the mummy kind of thing. And then at the end of the game, I gave her the mummy's character sheet and said, just use this or whatever. And then we got some PvP where she was picking off, whichever humans were left hiding in the museum. That was it. That was the game. The mummies win. Um, and then the epilogue is we brought in Dracula, and we said that, basically Dracula um is putting together a team. Ironically, I can't remember quite how, like, I can't remember if that first Iron Man movie had come out yet or not. I don't know if that came out like earlier that year and we were doing it on purpose, or if it just so happened we were doing it. But basically, Dracula does the Nick Fury thing at the end of Iron Man, where he's like, I want to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, the post-credit scene. That's basically what we did, is Dracula shows up and we find out that Dracula, not only is he alive, he's in America now in the 1930s. Same with Frankenstein, you know what I mean? So on and so forth. And they're putting together this team of universal monsters. And so the mummy and the bride of the mummy accept. And now they're going to be on the team. And that was it. That was the game. By the way, despite the fact everybody lost, everybody had a good time. Like a lot of the parties that I throw, along these lines. Usually we order a bunch of pizza for everybody. Usually everybody's drinking Mike's Hard Lemonade or something like that. Everybody's having a good time. And they didn't really mind that their characters died. Um, and and then at the end, everybody was kind of talking about maybe we could do a game where like everybody's a monster, and so can be Frankenstein, and this guy can be Dracula, and she can be the bride of Frankenstein or whatever, and so be the Wolfman. And we talked about doing that. And then I think what happened was once Halloween was over, we weren't really in that kind of a mood anymore, you know? Um, and so we never did anything with it. We never picked up on this story. To this day, we never found out what became of that team. So now that I think about it, maybe this Halloween, if I remember, maybe I should run a game set in the 1930s and we should do something with that team, that could be kind of cool. Um, I'll have to see if I remember it when Halloween rolls around. At any rate, though, that's it. That's it for this game session. Uh, I hope that you enjoyed it. We for sure enjoyed playing it. So, as always, we hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, smash the like button. That helps out the channel. Make sure you're subscribed because YouTube does like to unsubscribe people sometimes. Ring the bell so you know when we upload more content. And as always, leave us a comment because that really helps out the channel. Um, and I would love to know, like, who is your favorite Universal monster? Or conversely, if you're a gamer, have you ever played in a game with a mummy? Because I've, ever since this game session that I just told you about, I will bring it up every once in a while with my D&D friends, even the ones that, didn't play in this game session. And nobody I've ever met in person has ever had a game with a mummy in it. And I think it's because most D&D games tend to take place in like a European style setting. Like I know a lot of guys who they've never even played a D&D game that took place in like a desert. You know what I mean? That it's always like forests and mountains and medieval towns and that, it's like always that setting. So I think that's why a lot of the dungeon masters around here where I live anyways just completely ignore mummies. But yeah, I would be really curious if our gamers who are listening have used mummies in their games. But yeah, that's it for us for this one. I hope you guys have a great week or weekend, depending on when you're listening to this. And I'll see you in the next one.